Greetings, old school magic players, and welcome to the Four Horsemen.
Old school magic players, thank you for joining us. In this video today we will be covering the Four Horsemen Old School Magic Tournament number 2, Summary and Matches. And we have the pleasure of being joined yet again today by our friend, the legendary old school magic champion, Brian Weissman. Brian will be covering tournament number 2, matches and deck techs with yours truly, the Judstar. The Four Horsemen is the newest, most unique and interesting old-school Magic format, focusing exclusively on the 1993-94 expansion sets of Magic the Gathering, inclusive of Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, and the Dark, allowing for basic lands and the banned and restricted list you see here. The Four Horsemen is one of the only old-school Magic formats that encourages and allows players to play proxies in tournaments. This helps ensure a level playing field, encourages participation amongst the broader old-school community, and ensures you always play the player and the strategy, not their pocketbook. In our Four Horsemen Tournament number 2, we're giving away unique Meyer Jr. custom proxies as prizes. Our Four Horsemen Tournament number 2 first place champion will also be receiving this amazing, unique, custom art Meyer Jr. Guardian Beast Purple Moonlight playmat. These playmats were custom made uniquely and specifically for the Four Horsemen and are an exclusive Four Horsemen only playmat. These unique and beautiful Guardian Beast playmats were created from custom art painted exclusively for the Four Horsemen in the summer of 2022 as part of the Four Horsemen launch. They also formed the foundation of our Kickstarter. We have a few playmats left. If you're interested, go to fourhorsemenmagic.com. For our next Four Horsemen free online tournament event, we are announcing Four Horsemen Tournament number 5, a special Winter Spice Tournament event. We will be featuring a unique and interesting update to the Four Horsemen Banned and Restricted. Stay tuned at the end of the video for all of the Four Horsemen Tournament number 5 announcements, and join us at teleria.app/events. After our tournament number 2 participants battled it out in their group geopods, we come to the Four Horsemen tournament number 2 quarterfinal brackets as you see here. And for our quarterfinals, Arnaud, our Four Horsemen tournament number 1 champion, returns with a mono-red aggro deck. Philippe joins us with blue-green skies. Stephen Goblin King returns for tournament number 1 with his optimized red-white tower tax edge deck, and yours truly, the Chadster, runs a red-green aggro Blood Moon deck. And also for our quarterfinals, Brad Quadon joins us with his red-white land tax edge Blood Moon deck. Parker, aka Cause, joins us with his mono-blue Workshots Robots deck. And Gregor Ghostan joins us with his red-white land tax edge Ball Lightning deck. And John Eccleberry joins us with his blue-red Skies Blood Moon aggro deck. Join us now, as it is our pleasure to present to you the Four Horsemen Tournament number 2 quarterfinals match between our tournament number 1 champion, Arnaud Avenel, and Philippe Bizien. Watch as Arnaud defends his championship with his mono-red aggro deck versus Philippe's blue-green skies. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, to the match.
All right, welcome back to the Four Horsemen tournament number 2. Commentating with Brian Weissman. And
Hello again.
thanks for joining us, Brian. We're going to be covering the second match in the Four Horsemen number 2 that ran this summer. As you know, Brian, our commentator, will be joining us today and covering the match. We're going to do a deck tech, and then we'll get into the matches. Michael's also been joining us, but he stepped away for a date this evening. So cheers to Michael, and good luck. Today we're going to be covering a quarterfinals match. We've already covered my match versus Stephen Goblin King. And today we're going to be covering Arnaud Avenel versus Philippe Bizien.
Yes, let's jump into that. This is as much a sort of clash of styles and decks as the last matchup that we covered. Although both of these decks are pretty novel. We've covered sort of the base archetypes in the format so far, and a couple of other designs that tend to sort of be aggro-oriented. And we have two totally different decks this time. Arnaud, who won the last event, I believe, with Mono Blue Shops, has gone in a totally different direction. He's playing Mono Red, hyper-aggressive deck. I'm going to cover that first. And this deck, I love this deck, actually. It showcases so many neat and interesting cards that you would never, ever see in most old-school tournament formats, much less really any tournament format outside of maybe a singleton format. Starting with the mana base, of course, it's all the usual suspects. He's got a total of 16 basic mountains alongside 4 factory, 4 strip mine, and 1 Library of Alexandria for a total of 25 mana sources, which is probably about perfect. And then we delve down into the creatures. And this deck has a lot of cards from the dark in it, which is pretty cool to see. It looks like he's got a total of, God, is that 20 cards from the dark? This deck is almost all dark cards. Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
So starting with the in the upper left-hand corner of the spells, we see 4 copies of Brothers of Fire. And certainly not a card you see a lot played and constructed. Anybody who played limited formats back in the mid-1990s that would remember Brothers of Fire. They were, I think they were printed in 5th edition, and they were one of the super powerhouse creatures in that format. Because even though the activation is pretty expensive, it's 2 red and a generic to deal 1 point of damage to any target. They allowed you to not only obviously ping away 1 toughness creatures, but it just gives you that extra thrust on the battlefield, that extra ability to just push through 1 point of damage to allow your factories to get through their factories, to allow your 3/3s to take down 4/4s, and so on. It just, the flexibility of the card is awesome. You can also just deal symmetric damage just as you would with something like Kumbaj Witches with it when you're ahead, and bring your opponent's life total down really quickly. And he's got a ton of mountains to support the card, so it's very, very strong in this deck. Alongside that, he has Fire Drake, which is kind of like little baby dragon whelp. It looks so innocuous. Just a 1/2 flyer for 3 mana with the ability to fire breathe. And I think it only, I'll confirm this real quick here. I believe you can only pump it once a turn.
Yeah,
Fire Drake. I think it's just a single. Yeah. So they were worried about this card being too strong if it had regular fire breathing. So 3 mana, 1/2 flyer, +1/+0 for a single red mana. So it only can spend 1 red mana per turn, which means you can also make it a 2/2 flyer on your opponent's turn. But that's the limitations of the card. It doesn't sound like it would be great, but in a limited card pool, a 2/2 flyer in red is actually pretty solid. And the damage from these guys can pile up. Plus, they're able to fly over Mishra's factories. They're able to fly over moat. It's definitely not a threat that you can ignore, particularly against a red deck filled with damage. And keeping with that theme, of course, 4 copies of arguably the best, well, certainly the best red damage dealing card in the dark. I would argue that probably Blood Moon is the best overall card in the dark. But certainly Ball Lightning made a huge splash when it was printed. 6 damage out of nowhere via Trample was a cornerstone of hyper-aggressive red decks of the day. And still pretty powerful, viable card. Certainly very strong in this format. He's got 4 copies of Ball Lightning to just deal huge amounts of damage out of nowhere. And alongside that, running 4 copies of Rook Egg, which he doesn't really have an easy way to destroy outside of his own Chain Lightnings. But Rook Egg, as we saw from our last matchup, is a hyper-powerful card that can lock up the board and put your opponent in a really, really bad situation where they just can't really attack you in any effective way, because the threat of an incoming Rook just blunts all of their attempts to leverage the board with damage dealing with creatures. You just can't let your opponent have a 4/4 flyer, because a 4/4 flyer will just pound your face in, because there just aren't that many ways to deal with it. And alongside the Rook Egg, he's got 4 copies of Mountain Yeti. Chad, what do you think about seeing Mountain Yeti in a top tier constructed deck? When was the last time you saw that?
Never. But, I'm not a top tier kind of guy. I do remember when I was a kid, though, Swords to Plowshares was the bane of every big fat creature. And I do remember in my like red, green Urnum deck having the Mountain Yetis in the sideboard if I was coming up against white. Now, we don't have that problem here in the Four Horsemen with swords and disenchants and things like that being removed by not allowing ABU, but we do have Spirit Link, which is the next best answer. So not only is the Mountain Yeti invulnerable to Spirit Link, but as you mentioned in our pre-chat here, the Blood Moon will turn the non-basics into mountains, and then the Yeti's got the Mountain Walk. So he's got two advantages. He's a 3/3, which is not great, but not terrible, but invulnerable to Spirit Link and Mountain Walking through Blood Moon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, kind of a pesky creature. And I think this is a really cool metagame call. Even outside of Blood Moon, I just think that there's likely a lot of decks running red. And having a red creature that's totally evasive, that's just a steady 3 damage that just walks past Mishra's Factories, for example, and laughs at them is pretty damn effective. And the pro white is unlikely to matter, just given that there's a real dearth of playable white creatures in this format. It seems like all of the good white creatures in the format are either in revised, or I should say alpha. They're either in the alpha block or they're in Fallen Empires. And there's this big gap in the middle where there really aren't any good white creatures. So Mountain Yeti doesn't really have a lot of good creature-based interaction, and certainly not a ton of removal-based interaction in the Four Horsemen format. But I think that Mountain Walk is really significant. And he was probably looking around just for some decent options and just fell on this creature and said, you know what, this is probably good enough. I mean, it's a 4-drop. I'm only running 4 Rook Eggs in the 4-drop slot, and I kind of need a decent solid threat, and the Mountain Yeti kind of fits that bill pretty well.
Yeah.
Moving down into the pure spells, he's got 4 copies of Chain Lightning, obviously the ubiquitous, best, most efficient removal available in the format. 4 copies of Blood Moon, matching what you decided to play as well, although I think in this deck it makes a little bit more sense, given the fact that the Blood Moon turns all of his non-basic lands, including his 4 factories and 4 strip mines, into mountains, which pairs very nicely with the card just to the right of that, which is the card Eternal Flame. And I've actually seen Eternal Flame played in a couple of mono red singleton deck lists in old school. You really need to see 4 of them show up, but it's I think another pretty underrated and underplayed card. Very, very efficient, compact damage, particularly in a deck that is leveraging all of that early pressure through Brothers of Fire and Ball Lightning and stuff. You're very likely to have a pretty healthy life lead, which means that the symmetric damage that, I guess it's somewhat asymmetric, but the symmetric damage that Eternal Flame deals, the way the card works mechanically is you deal damage to your opponent equal to the number of mountains you play, and then you deal the damage equal to half of the mountains you control, rounded up to yourself. So if you have, let's say, 7 mountains in play, you pay 4 red, you deal 7 damage, which is a huge chunk of damage, and you take 4 yourself, but you're likely to be well ahead, and that could easily close out the game. And in fact, I think a lot of people, for the most part, are sort of just assuming that if you're not at 3, you're okay from not dying to the top of the deck. I guess maybe Pyrotechnics as well. So maybe if you're not at 4, you're pretty safe from the top of the deck, and Eternal Flame obviously completely changes that. And I imagine Arnaud has closed out tons of games with Eternal Flames for 7-8 damage. Just out of the blue, you're dead now. Sorry.
Right.
And then, of course, he has one of the other really good removal spell in the format, Pyrotechnics, which is kind of like a Fireball substitute, and has the ability to be split between creatures. Just nice, compact 4 points of damage to kill off rooks and other opposing creatures. 4 toughness things like Surrender Freed, like the Ghost Ship, and of course the Azure Drake as well. In his sideboard, he has pretty much the standard sideboard you'd expect. A little bit light on Artifact Kill, which is a little surprising to me. He does have 4 Shadow Storms, but he has elected to not go with Artifact Blast or with Detonate, and instead he's gone with some more heavy creature removal. And again, this totally relates to what I was saying before. I suspect that Arnaud probably did test his deck, and he probably recognized that one of the big vulnerabilities of mono red, given the fact that Eternal Flame doesn't target creatures, is that if your opponent plays a big Urnam Jin or something, you might not have a way to kill it. And so to that effect, he's running 4 copies of Fissure in the sideboard to deal with big creatures. He's got 4 active volcanoes for the blue threats that I already mentioned, the 2 restricted artifacts that just hose expansions, and then finally 1 copy of Firestorm Phoenix. What do you think about the Firestorm Phoenix in the sideboard?
I don't know what to think about that. I know I used to have one. I traded it away. I think it costs 4 colorless and 2 red, and it's not a particularly threatening flyer. The only thing I can think is, if he comes up against Moat, he could swap out the Yeti for an extra flyer. You know?
Yeah.
Why not use Bird Maiden at that point or something that's cheaper?
Yeah, I mean, Bird Maiden is sort of like a really weak version of Fire Drake, but just a little bit more castable.
I mean, the 6 mana, I mean, he's running what? He's running 16, 20, 24. He's running 25 mana, but that's actually, you know, like we were saying in some of our other videos, you know, with the 4 strip mines, you're using your strip mines and they're stripping yours. You could easily have 8 mana disappear from your mana base. So, you know, most of my decks are running 28, 27 mana sources to adjust. I think he's going to have trouble casting that Firestorm Phoenix to begin with, maybe even the Fishers.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some validity to that. I would be curious to know what compelled him to put the Phoenix in his deck and what specifically that's targeting. I think that probably measured up against the sort of entirety of the format, that a card like Detonate or maybe Artifact Blast might be a little bit more universally useful. But it probably, Arnaud strikes me as being a very competent player and deck builder, and so he probably does have a specific matchup in mind.
Yeah,
with regards to including that card. So let's go to his opponent. What is Philippe's last name? I've got him as just Philippe here.
His last name is, let's get it right. He's a Canadian player, and his last name is Bizien. Bizien. Philippe Bizien.
Philippe Bizien from Canada, probably from the French part of Canada. All right, so Philippe has got a really, really cool and unique design. This deck is way outside the box in terms of other decks that we've assessed. I guess the closest thing that we've seen to this was one of the decks from the last event that I believe also made the top 8.
Yes, that was Rob Hackney's blue-green aggro flyer deck.
Gotcha. Yeah, his blue-green blue skies, and he was even running things like Scrib Sprite and
well, not Scrib Sprite. He was running the.
He had the Fire Sprite or something.
Yes,
yeah,
the 1/1 green flyers.
Yeah, exactly. Much obviously with Pendelhaven, it's way better, but certainly considerably worse than Scrib Sprite if that's your game plan. But he has 4 Flying Men, 4 Serendipity. Certainly the beginnings of a Skies deck right there. He's running, it looks like 3 copies of Elves of Deep Shadow for some acceleration into those 4 obligatory copies of Urnam Jin, which is absolutely top-tier creature in the format. Probably not the best creature overall. Probably, what do you think, 2nd or 3rd best?
I mean, it's pretty damn good.
Yeah, I think Serendip for sure, #1 creature. I think probably Su-Chi is #2, just given how good Workshop is. But Urnam has got to be way up there.
Yeah. Urnam Jin is the reason why Ken Meyer Jr. is kind of the artist of choice for, you know, the instantiation of the 4 Horsemen. Urnam, my favorite creature as a child, you know, and he was in every green deck that I ever had. So the 5 defense is really what does it for Urnam, plus the 1 green. It's just, he's so good.
It's just so good. Chad, were you one of those filthy degenerates who was delighted when they reprinted it in Chronicles?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, everybody was mad. I was probably 20 or 21 years old when they reprinted Chronicles, and I do have one original Arabian Nights Urnam Jin, but I traded for it, and I probably traded like a dual land for it or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, you know, the players like me, I mean, I was making minimum wage, I was in college, I was broke, and somehow managed to, you know, acquire Magic cards by spending all my paycheck on this, you know, cardboard. And I was glad that Chronicles was printed while everyone else was angry.
I suspected as much. All right, so moving on to the slot to the right of that. 2 copies of Wailuli Wolf, another card that I absolutely love. I love Wailuli Wolf. It's such a cool effect. It's been in a couple of limited formats over the years, and it's just a powerhouse creature. The true threat of Wailuli Wolf lies in its potential. The fact that you generally never use it. You kind of you have a Wailuli Wolf in play, and it's like having an untapped Mishra's Factory that can pump anything.
That's right.
And it completely changes all the math. Serendipity kills Serendipity and lives. Urnam kills Urnam and lives.
Right.
It's just incredibly powerful. And you can obviously, under the new rules templating, you could use Wailuli Wolf to block and pump itself to become a 2/2. But if you get a couple of them in play, it makes just combat math impossible for your opponent just by nature of it sitting there untapped. You never even have to use it.
Mm-hmm. Plus, even if you do need to, you know, you get multiple pump scenarios, so you can attack with your elves, for example, pump them with the Pendlehaven, and then pump them with the Wolf. It's like,
yeah, 3/4 creature out of nowhere, right? Just a really, really cool, flexible creature. I really, really like it. It's really nice to see it in the main deck right here. Philippe runs 2 copies of Sylvan Library, which seems probably about the right number. I'm not hugely bullish on the card, mainly because of the fact that the format has no way to shuffle. And I think that Sylvan Library was always kind of a decent card, but I don't think it really came into its own until they started printing fetch lands.
Yeah.
The fetch lands really elevated the card tremendously in power level. If you don't have a way to gain life in the form of Ivory Tower or something, it's very hard to leverage Sylvan Library, particularly in a format where people can deal a lot of early damage to you and can finish you off with things like Chain Lightning. And I can't imagine that Philippe is going to be able to comfortably take even 1 extra card against his mono-red opponent, because that could easily make the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah, well, Brian, per our last match, you could theoretically run Sylvan Library with Visions and shuffle.
You could do that, I suppose. You've got 4 copies of Mana Drain, which is the best counterspell probably ever printed. Certainly in this era, it's the best counterspell that exists by far. And he doesn't have a ton of ways to leverage it, but at the same time, it's still Mana Drain. You're not Mana Draining into a Jam Day Tome or a Big Brain Geyser or a Time Twister or something, but you can Mana Drain and then just go Urnam Serendib Jin or something, or Urnam Serendib Efreet, and still have mana left over to remove Soul or something. So, and the fact that it's just a hard, pure counterspell just makes the card magnificent. I do think that one thing I do like about the 4 Horsemen format is the lack of those sort of degenerate card drawing spells in the format do kind of make Mana Drain more balanced. The card is still absolutely top tier power, but it feels more fair and balanced in this format than it does in the other formats, where you're Mana Draining into just ridiculous things like, Time Walk, Time Twister, or Mana Drain, Mind Twist you for 5 on turn 3 or something.
Right.
It's just those things aren't happening. Yeah. And as a result, it feels bad and often backbreaking to be Mana Drain, but it's not nearly as decisive and just ruinous as it feels in a format like Old School, where obviously the card was restricted.
That's right, Brian. I can tell you from yesterday's tournament here at the SCG Con here in Dallas, we had our first in-person tournament. I myself Mana Drained multiple times in multiple matches, and I had nothing to do with the mana. I had to counter the spell because it was going to be game ruining. And if you don't have a Mishra's Factory in play, and you're not running things like Triskelion and Suchi and Tetravis and these big, 5/6 casting, like there's Urnam is basically Urnam or Serendib, Efreet are the 2 major targets to pump your mana in. And I found myself mana burning often with Mana Drain and no choice about it. Yeah,
and I think based on that, I mean, I'll cover this again when we get to the mana base of this deck. But I do think that the big oversight in this deck, again, there's no factories in this deck, and I think that running 4 Mana Drain alongside no Mishra's Factories is a mistake. I think that just Mana Drain or Mana Burn is a big deal. You can't just take 4 damage out of nowhere for no reason because you Mana Drain the spell and your hand is 2 Flying Man or something, right? Or Flying Man remove Soul. I mean, there's lots of scenarios where you just don't have anything to spend the mana on, and you just take a huge amount of damage for no reason.
On the flip side of that, what I can tell you is what I've experienced is, without dual lands, as you have discussed, it's very difficult to play. It's basically impossible to play 3 colors, but it's still difficult to play 2 colors. And if you're running, say, Maze of Ith, Mishra's Factory, Strip Mine, 4X of those, you've got 12 lands that basically don't tap for a color and 4 of them that don't tap for anything. So, I've mentioned I tend to run 27, 28, 29 lands. That's the reason why. And I would assume the reason Philippe didn't run the factories here is because, number 1, people are playing Moat. And number 2, he probably in his deck testing found, oh my gosh, with 4 strips and 4 factories, I don't have the double blue when I need it, and I may not have the right color when I need it. So it's a back to your mana base thing. Mana base strategies, or as I'm learning from you and Michael and others, are the key to winning.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly in these formats where so much of the game is kind of decided early by just having a fluid and synergistic start. And if you stumble on mana, if you hit, you start the game in a deck like this, for example, and you open up with Forest, or Strip Mine, Forest, or something like that. Mm-hmm. You're very, like, a ton of cards. You have the ability to mulligan, right? And that mitigates it somewhat. But without dual lands, without fetching, without tutoring, without cards like Black Lotus and stuff, it's really, really hard to consistently get mana. And over the span of an entire 7-8 round tournament, you will definitely lose games to color screw. It's just inevitable that the math, there's no way of avoiding the math.
Yeah, and his elves are a mana ramp, but they don't tap for anything that he can use.
They don't make relevant. They don't make relevant mana, and actually that makes me sort of question the inclusion of them in the first place for two reasons. One of the primary reasons why you run mana elves in the first place is because of acceleration, right? But often mana things that make mana will actually help you in color fixing too. So, for example, Birds of Paradise, and then some of the cards that they've made more recently. I guess it was ages ago, but Noble Hierarch, and they made another Hierarch recently as well, very similar, but I think it might make black, white, and green or something. Ignoble, I think it's called Ignoble Hierarch. But the idea is that you use green mana and green mana fixing to facilitate the casting of other colors that you're also playing, and that makes green your core color, and the other cards effectively the splash. But going in the reverse, as he's doing here, which is sort of using green as the splash and also as the acceleration, is a little bit weird. And I think that maybe as much as I like Wily Wolf and Sylvan and all that stuff, that focusing this deck more around blue and just running my screen just turned off. Running just maybe Urnam Jin and Crumble as the green cards. Not worrying about acceleration, maybe use Felwar Stone in that slot instead. Yeah. And running just more good blue flyers like Azure Drake or Ghost Ship, because if you are running more islands, you can run Ghost Ship effectively. Yeah. Pushes the deck more in mono blue. It makes it less vulnerable to different disruption via strip mine. It makes it less vulnerable to color screw, and most importantly, allows you to run factory too. Yeah. So I think that just the splash of green for just Urnam Jin and maybe Crumble would probably be ultimately put the deck in a slightly better place if we're being critical. Although I do like the deck quite a bit. Yeah. He's got 2 copies of Serendip Jin, another creature that you almost never ever see. I know that a few people have tinkered around. My friend Stephen Menendian ran a single Serendip Jin in his old school blue-red deck that was very successful. And he just used that as kind of a busty flyer that he could sometimes just slam right away at the beginning of the game and just deal 10 damage out of nowhere with this huge impossible to kill creature outside of the swords. And it does carry a degree of risk, but if you're way ahead, you can just sack some non-islands to it also.
Yeah, and it's so hard to kill with that 6 defense. It flies, it gets over moat. I mean, pyrotechnics can't kill it.
It's just a night. It's just a house, right? You just can't. you can't really answer it. And sure, they're sacking a land every turn, but how long can you take 5 to the face for, right?
Yeah, not long.
It doesn't take very long, and it might even be 8 because he's got 4 copies of Unstable Mutation as well.
Oh yeah,
he can kill you in 2 hits, really. And yes, at the cost of just 2 land, more than a fair trade. He's got 2 copies of Remove Soul, another card that I think has been pretty woefully underplayed in these blue decks. You need to see more of that card because I think it's quite good in a very creature-heavy format. And 3 copies of Crumble, awesome to see that as well. And then finally 2 Boomerangs, just as kind of the catch-all to deal with potentially problem threats like Abyss, for example.
Yes, exactly.
If Abyss comes down, he's hating life. This deck is really, really weak against Abyss. In fact, it automatically loses to Abyss for the most part. He doesn't really have any way to win if Abyss comes down. So let's go to the sideboard. I see on the far left the ultimate nemesis of all of these artifact decks: 4 copies of Energy Flux. Yeah. And to me, the presence of Energy Flux in the format, the fact that it's so obvious to play, and the fact that people are not going to be compelled to not use Energy Flux because most decks aren't running very many artifacts, if any artifacts at all. The decks that would run Flux, it has no drawback to them whatsoever. And you see this deck doesn't even have Felwar Stones. So the card is just an absolutely stone-cold silver bullet killer against any artifact-based strategy, particularly the Shops decks. You cannot win if Flux comes into play. You're basically just lose automatically at 3 mana.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and once again, this is back to the strategy of you have to have a way to deal with the Workshop robots decks. There's too many good creatures. I mean, even in decks that aren't running Workshop, we're seeing 4 Triskelions just because Triskelion is so unbelievably good. So. Yeah, I mean, if he drops a first turn elf and a second turn island and second turn energy flux, it's game over for a workshop.
Yeah, it's lights out instantaneously. And of course, that would be the turn when you've just triumphantly used your workshop to ramp out a Suchi too, right? And then he plays energy flux. You take 4 mana burn during your upkeep and it dies.
There you go.
It's pretty horrible scenario.
Yeah.
All right, there's 3 copies of Flash Flood, I think. I suspect that's 4 copies of Flash Flood, which is, essentially the blue elemental blast of this format. Not nearly as flexible, but still very, very good at dealing with permanents. It doesn't counter red spells though, which is going to be problematic. I'm actually going to look back at Philippe's deck real quick. Does he have those? He has active volcanoes. Okay, so we've got the classic battle of active volcano versus Flash Flood, right? Yeah, normally it's the blast, but in this, it's this format's version of the dueling elemental blast.
Yeah, it'll take out your opponent's blood moon, so you can keep your Pendlehavens, Curd Ape, things like that.
Yeah, no, it does handle those pesky early red creatures, right? And you can kill a rook. I believe the rook creature too, so that's good. And keeping with the blast theme, he has 2 copies of Winter Blast, another really neat high-tech card that I'm sure he's running just for kind of like a deck like his, where you could easily get in one of these creature stalls, and you build up to like 5 or 6 mana, and you just go Winter Blast your team, die. You just attack 12 and something, and they're just instantly dead.
Yeah, Winter Blast is one of those cards that I would call it the 4 Horsemen flavor cards. I mean, Wailuli Wolf, Winter Blast, Witch Hunter. Even things like the Elves of Deep Shadow. I mean, these are all cards that you never see in any top tier deck. But in this format, they're very functional and powerful. I do remember playing Winter Blast as a kid just because it was a way to your opponent thinks they have their defense set up, and so they think they're stabilized. And you have an Urnum and maybe a couple of small creatures. You can Winter Blast, tap things if they fly. I think they end up taking damage. So it's a way to just completely compromise your opponent's defense and get that.
Yeah, it does 2 damage to flyers as well. So you can use it to finish off opposing Cern de Befrites after they block yours or something. Pretty effective card. The only obvious weakness to it is that it's not instant. So you can't use like cool tricks with it because imagine how powerful Winter Blast would be if it were instant. They go to declare their attack step, and you tap them out, kill off a flyer, and then untap and smash into them with your entire team and just kill them.
Right, and since he doesn't have red, and he doesn't have Chain Lightning and Pyrotechnics, after combat, if he's got his, Flying Men and Cern de Befrite, and maybe the Bizien, he could possibly take out things like Azure Drake or Ghost Ship with
anything that's blocked and has some damage sitting on it. So he's got this Feldon's Cane, which everybody seems to want for some reason. There's a 4th copy of Crumble, which I certainly love to see, and I think I would have liked to see. Well, I guess he's got 4 energy fluxes. I was going to say that maybe some Scavenger Folk would make a great deal of sense. But given the fact that he does have 4 energy fluxes, he should be pretty well covered against most of the artifact decks. Single copy of Concordant Crossroads, of course, vitally important because it's an enchant world, and that gives him a much, much needed out against the Abyss. And I think Abyss is such a deadly threat against this deck that I would have imagined seeing more copies of Concordant Crossroads just for that contingency, because it's just so backbreaking. And it's not like the card is bad either. A deck like Philippe's really kind of likes Concordant Crossroads in play. You love being able to go like Urnam unstable, take 7, right? And then the fact that you can just essentially ball lightning your opponent with all of these different creatures because of a card like Unstable Mutation, it'll act just like a Giant Growth almost because of the haste component.
Yeah.
And you can just kill your opponent out of nowhere. They think that they're safe at 12, and you go Urnam, Cern de Befrite, Unstable Mutation, you're dead.
Yeah. You could argue, and I was experimenting this in one of my first decks. It was a black-green deck that ran, the Elves, it ran Juzums, it ran the Urg Raiders, it ran the Wailuli Wolves, and it was all about, and of course Urnam Jinn, it was all about trying to get your creatures down. And there were certain turns where, on the 4th or 5th turn, I could drop a Concordant Crossroads, drop a Wailuli Wolf and a Urnam Jinn or a Juzum Jinn and attack with everybody plus everything that's in play.
Yeah.
Accordance, you can surprise your opponent and do a ton of damage. You could argue maybe his strategy could have been to double up on the Concordant Crossroad idea. That compromises the Abyss, and you focus on your bigger, fatter creatures.
Yeah, one of the things I think you're really actually seeing is that Abyss is really being underplayed in the format because of the dual land problem. It's really, really hard to justify playing black in this format. And if you're playing black, you're kind of playing Abyss, and then what else? What else do you add to your deck? Because there just isn't enough stuff.
Maybe Fallen Angel.
Yeah, but like most of the black cards, I mean, there's a few things. Guardian Beast is good.
Guardian Beast is good. Urg Raiders is very good.
But those are not Abyss color. They're like, those have no synergy with the Abyss. Greed does to an extent, but certainly Guardian Beast doesn't. It's like Abyss is kind of just out there on its own as this singular black card that pushes you into the color.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so there's no real place for it, which means that a lot of these decks that would fold to the Abyss kind of don't have to worry about it.
That's
but
true.
imagine if you could run
in
your blue-white control deck or whatever you built, you can run Underground Sea and Scrubland, and now you've got like access to 3 to 4 copies of Abyss. Now people really have to start considering what to do against that.
Yeah.
And have to splash Enchant Worlds in their sideboard just to have some sort of interaction with it at all. And speaking of interaction, Philippe has another boomerang here, a third one, which is kind of like a bit of a stopgap against a card like Abyss. Maybe you can boomerang it and then mana drain it when it comes back down. And then he's got, I think that's enchantment alteration.
Yeah, to switch his unstables around.
Yeah, which is a really kind of neat, cool tech trick. You can imagine your opponent, you attack with a unstably mutated Urnam and a Serendib, and your opponent blocks your Serendib with his Serendib, and you go, haha, enchantment alteration, throw the unstable mutation from the Urnam onto the Serendib, kill his Serendib, and now you've got a Mahamodi in play as well.
Yeah, it can be used almost like it's an instant, right?
Yeah, it's got to be an instant, of course. I mean, I can't tell if it's so blurry there, but I suspect it has to be.
Let me see, because that's actually...
If it's not, then it's...
I think what I was thinking was I didn't realize it was an instant. I thought what he was going to do was move once your creature gets countered down to almost dead. You move it on to the next creature.
Yeah, no, it's instant. So it's kind of like a neat combat trick when combined with unstable mutations. It's a bit like Giant Growth.
Wow, that is great. That is very
cool. And definitely a card you would never expect in a million years, right?
Yeah.
How many people even know that this card is real, even though, or that it's a card? Although it was actually apparently reprinted in Urza's Saga for some reason.
Yeah, instant 1 blue. Switch target enchantment from one creature to another, or from one land to another. Yeah, that is very interesting. I didn't realize that was an instant. Wow. So
and then, like, if the guy goes to strip mine your land, you can alteration your consecrate,
which
land onto your land. You're like, gotcha.
You can move a blight.
Yeah, or move a blight or whatever. Okay. Anyway, no, I think the card's cool. It's cool tech, and I really, really like Philippe's deck. And so we have to get to the inevitable question: who do you think is favored, Chad? Who's likely to win this matchup?
Well, I'm biased. I mean, I shouldn't say anything. You should comment on that. I mean, Arnaud did win first place in tournament number 1, but he was
he's very, very experienced. Let me bring up the 2 decks side by side.
I mean, it's mono red. The advantage Arnold has is he doesn't have to worry about mana base or colors, right? And he's got the Blood Moons to shut down, mechanical lands and a lot of the powerful lands. But, Philippe's deck is obviously going to be very fast. He can get a Flying Man turn 1. He can get an Elves of Deep Shadow, and if he gets an Elves first turn, he can have a second turn Serendib. That is like one of the best turns in this format, second turn Dib. And as you mentioned, Arnaud doesn't really have anything to do except for Chain Lightning until turn 3.
Yeah, I really think I think that certainly in game 1, Philippe should be pretty heavily favored, provided that he doesn't stumble on mana in some way, which is definitely a distinct possibility. It'd be very possible for him to not hit double blue for a little while and being unable to cast mana drains, for example. But he does, or boomerangs, but he does have, he has the foresight. He's got 14 blue mana sources, so it's quite a bit. And just looking at the way the 2 decks stack up, I think a really big vulnerability that Arnaud has actually is those four Blood Moons are very likely to hurt him, actually, not only because they shut off his factories. They don't really do anything against Philippe at all, other than tamper with his...
Well, the Pendlehavens, maybe.
He's not leaning on the Pendlehavens for anything but green mana, really. They're kind of just there with an ancillary benefit. And so starting the matchup, and you've got basically 4 dead cards against your opponent, is a pretty big liability.
Yeah.
That said, Philippe has 3 copies of Crumble, and the only card that he can kill in Arnaud's deck are the Mishra's Factories with that. So there's a little bit of parity there. They both kind of deal with the land situation, but Arnaud's big finisher, the Eternal Flame, is not a given at all against Philippe's deck because it's so hyper aggressive. And Arnaud could find himself in a situation where he's got 2 Eternal Flames in hand and he's behind on life. And he can't even cast it because unless you're finishing your opponent off, what do? You tap 4 mana, deal 5 to your opponent, take 3 yourself, and then he hits you for 7 on the next turn and kills you, right? So I could see Arnaud, depending on the draw, being really, really on the back foot early in the game and just being unable to handle these big, beefy blue and green creatures. Cern of Efreet, obviously a perennial menace for any red deck with that 4 health and given how fast it comes down. And Arnaud's interaction against it is, a 5-mana pyrotechnics to stop it, and that's not going to work. The Mountain Yetis are not good in the matchup either. They're just these, 3/3, they're just dorky hill giants, and they're totally outclassed by the other creatures in the air or on the ground.
Yeah.
But we're not going to worry about the sideboard right now. We'll get to that after the first game. So let's hop into that game and go from there. All right, guys, welcome back to another 4 Horsemen matchup. This is another quarterfinal match played at the tail end of August, so a little over a month ago. On the left side, we've got Philippe. I'm just going to pronounce his name as that, Canadian player. And he is up against Arnaud, who is a real stalwart of this format, having won the last event that was held, the inaugural 4 Horsemen event, with mono blue shops. And for this match, he's gone a totally different direction. He's playing a very, very aggressive mono red deck. And Philippe is playing a really cool, innovative blue green deck. I would call it, I guess, blue green skies or something quite close to that, with some neat little tech cards, primarily Wailulu Wolf, Sylvan Library, Unstable Mutation, a few other things. Looks like they're still contemplating their hands. I can't tell if they've decided to, both decided to keep. It kind of looks like Philippe. Okay, it looks like they are both keeping. And we're off to the races. No turn 1 play from Philippe. Factory comes down for Arnaud. And we'll see what happens on turn 2. He's got 2 blue mana. And I know that he's got access to Boomerang. It'd be interesting to see if Arnaud plays a land and tries to run in there with his factory. Because if he does that and Philippe has a Boomerang, that would be honestly pretty devastating tempo play. He wouldn't even lose card advantage because Arnaud would have to discard. But we'll see what happens. Does he pass or is he going to attack? Come on, let's see a Boomerang. So I'm looking at his hand. And it looks like he's just taking the damage. Yeah, Boomerang on turn 2 factory attack is pretty awesome because your opponent can't really have a follow-up and they go up to 8 cards in hand and they have to discard and they lose a land drop. It can be a huge back-breaking tempo play. But it looks like he gets away with it here. Philippe is sitting on 2 islands, and he's playing blue-green, so he's got this pretty substantial green component in his deck, and does not appear to have any force yet. It's a 3rd land, so it's 3 islands, probably Cern of Efreet. Yep, that's pretty obvious. All right, so what are Arnaud's answers to that? Chad, does he have anything that can really interact with the 3/4 flyer this early?
Well, he's not with that mana base. That's the problem we were talking about. I mean, he can't do anything except for attack with a Mishra until turn 3, and even then, he's got the Fire Drake. He's got, he doesn't have any answer to second or third turn Serendip at all.
Yeah, the question is let's say you're Arnaud and you have this 3 lands. Do you run the factory in any way and hope the guy doesn't block because he fears you to follow up with Chain Lightning?
Yeah, I mean, Phil is a pretty good player. He's a long-term player. He's actually friends of Peter's. If you remember, Peter was in tournament number 1, and he did pretty well. He was running the blue Artifacts Workshop deck that had the Colossus and transmuting the Colossus.
Yes. Yeah, I do remember that.
They were friends, and he recommended him to the format. But Phil's been playing a long time.
The mana drainless shops deck with blue.
Yeah, that's right. But Colossus. Phil would not fall for that, blocking with the Mishras and getting Chain Lightning. He would let.
It's a tough call. It's a tough call, really, because you really have to depend. The thing is that Cern of Efreet seems like a great deal, but I think in Philippe's situation, if my opponent did send in the factory, I would 100% block. Because worst case scenario, you 2-for-1 him, you take his entire turn and a factory and a Chain Lightning, and you save yourself the damage of having to take points from your own Serendip, which is a big deal. You can see he's very happy to just push into the red zone here for 3 to tie up the life totals at 17 all. Mm-hmm. He's got a strip mine here, which is an interesting conundrum here. Okay, he just plays the land and passes. So no strip mine at all. Has the option to take out the factory or take out a second mountain. But the Fire Drake can only pump once. Maybe he's just holding the factory back with the intention of strip mining if Arnaud decides to invest the mana in attacking with it first. Do you think you would you have strip mine right there, or will you just let it give him an opportunity to attack you first? All right, so it looks like he's strip mining an island.
Yeah, there he goes.
Yeah, no real drawback in that. We know that Philippe doesn't. Oh, and he's slamming down Blood Moon. So the question
I don't know if I would have done that strip mine, because we know Arnaud needs 4 mana for a lot of his key spells. So, you know, it's going to hold unless he's got multiple lands in his hand.
This is a bit of a weird play. I was talking before about how I felt that Philippe was favored by nature of the fact that those Blood Moons are dead cards. And you can see right here, he's playing Blood Moon. Philippe is just going to strip mine in response since everything is effectively a mountain anyway. And so he spent his entire turn playing a Blood Moon that didn't really impact the board at all, not in any meaningful way. And in a tempo race where the life totals are very soon to be, it looks like it's going to be 14 to 14. Or maybe I think he actually already subtracted the life point. I think that life totals after the point of Serendip damage are 15. So it's going to be 15 to 14, but certainly huge advantage to Philippe, given that he's got tempo and mana advantage. Although, so he plays another mountain, not going to really impact anything. And this is an unstable mutation. Oh boy. Yeah, that's kind of a big threat. 6/7 flying. Smash. So just like that, huge chunk of Arnaud's life total gone. He's down to 11. And I just can't imagine him being able to race a threat that big with just a Fire Drake and 2 lands. So this is kind of the scenario I was talking about, how, you know, Arnaud, some of Arnaud's most powerful tools, like Brothers of Fire and, of course, the Eternal Flames, and he's running 4 copies of those Eternal Flames, suddenly look really, really dubious when you're facing down such a fast and lethal threat like that Serendip Freak. Although Arnaud could quickly tie things up again here with a Ball Lightning. Looks like they're still discussing the life totals. Yeah, I think it was a total of 6 damage, and he was at 17, so now he's down to 11. We'll see if Philippe has another follow-up play. Still just kind of adjusting the battlefield here.
Yeah, I mean, that unstable in the Serendip. I mean,
yeah. So imagine
with only 2 lands, I think it's game. I think Arnaud's going to end up conceding and go.
Well, I wouldn't say that's a sure thing, because if Arnaud hits a mountain and casts Ball Lightning here, he can attack for 7, and that'll drop Philippe down to 8 life, and he'll take another point during his upkeep, and then he's potentially facing down lethal damage from another Ball Lightning. Although we do know that Philippe has 4 copies of Mana Drain. Yeah, here comes Ball Lightning.
There it is. Yeah, look at there.
Yeah, so, you know, we can't speak too quickly. This is 7 coming in right now. Oh, remove Soul.
Oh, no.
Oh, get out of here.
That's brutal.
Yeah, well, that's almost certainly going to be decisive. Now there's no racing. He may, in fact, just have to chump block here.
And he's only got 2 of those remove Souls. He's not running 4, so that was fortunate.
No, but I mean, it's an underplayed card. The card, nobody expects it.
Yeah.
They're not expecting to have their 3 or 4 drop countered for 1 blue and 1 generic. It's the only card in the format that does that.
Yeah,
I guess Force Spike would have stopped it too. But
yeah, I used it quite a bit yesterday in the in-person tournament. Countered a lot of Serendips and Urnums with it. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, a card that I think is really woefully underplayed in this format that the blue decks aren't using is Old Man of the Sea. Every blue deck that I've built so far in my deck design has included copies of Old Man of the Sea, their main deck or sideboard. I think Old Man is insane. There's so little removal that actually gets rid of it. There's just Chain Lightning. And against any deck, like what does your red-green deck do against an Old Man of the Sea if you don't have a Chain Lightning on hand? How do you beat that card? It grabs all of your creatures, and then you just use your creature to block the other creature. And then the Old Man untaps and takes another guy. Like, there's no beating the card. It's just impossible to deal with.
I don't know what they're discussing here. It's quite the long delay.
Yeah, well, he's drawn a force. He smashes in here. He chump blocks with the Drake, and he's probably just going to drop an Urnam Jin on the board.
Yeah.
To really ramp up the pressure. You can see him talking about it.
He's only got 1 counter on that right now. So, and plus,
I mean, maybe they're discussing the size of the creature. It's currently a Mahamudi. It's 5/6.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going away for many turns. There it is. Yeah.
Boom.
Predictable.
Well, I think I can predict one of the cards that's going to be coming in from Arnaud's sideboard. City in a Bottle.
Oh, yes.
And that's okay, right? It's going to blunt some of the damage. It's still going to take 4 in the air. And the Rook will be able to challenge the diminished Serendip at that point, provided he doesn't have another unstable mutation for it.
Yeah, the problem is this is where the Urnam's 5 defense comes in. It's so good. It's just like almost nothing can kill it.
Yeah, there's no instant speed pumping in red really outside of Bloodlust, and Arnaud has decided not to use that card, so he doesn't really have any way to boost the Rook up to deal. Okay, so he does not attack. This is a really peculiar play to me. I mean, obviously Arnaud would block in a heartbeat, and maybe his concern is that he's got another Rook egg afterward. Okay, Serendip Jin. Okay, Well, I mean, he's got him down to 7, and by not giving him a flyer, it means the Serendib will get to attack. Yeah, I guess he's just representing lethal in the air right on this next attack step, since that's 5 from the Serendib Jin, and I believe the Serendib will drop down to its regular stats next turn. I think it has 2 counters, which means that that's 8 in the air, and he's down to 7, which means he needs a flyer or he's just dead.
Yeah, that's just brutal. It's just I'd be scooping my cards if I was.
I think in his position, I think I still would have attacked with Arnaud, mainly because a 4/5 just isn't that impactful. He gives him a 4/5 creature, right? And then he sends in all 3 guys. Sure, go ahead and block my Serendib that's already dealt 9 damage to or whatever.
Right.
Or 10 damage. Go ahead and kill that and take 9 from the other 2 creatures.
Right.
It doesn't really work out. So, but needless to say, the game's over in short order, and that's kind of basically what we predicted, right?
Yeah.
He would have no answer. He'd draw Blood Moons that didn't do anything. He'd have no answer to those early big creatures, and he would just get steamrolled. So the question is, let's pause for a second, go to the sideboards, and discuss what they're going to do, since we haven't really talked about that. So Arnaud was the loser of that game. If you're sitting in a seat right now, Chad, what are you looking at in the sideboard, and what are you looking to take out?
Well, I mean, obviously you're going to put in the Volcanics, the City in a bottle, and I would be dropping in all 4 Fissures.
All 4? You'd go for all 4?
Yeah, because I mean, frankly, he's going to really struggle with those Urnham Gens because of the 5 defense.
Yeah.
So yeah, he needs those Fissures for the Urnhams. Frankly, for these Serendib Gens, even the Serendib Efreets, he's got like no way to kill. He's got no way to kill the Serendib Gens. He's got no way to kill the Urnhams because of their defense. So yeah, I would do City in a Bottle, all 4 Volcanics, and then the 4 Fissures. I would probably take out.
So you're saying 9 cards in, so quite a huge change.
Oh yeah, I would take out those. What's the sorcery that's the Eternal Flame? Yeah, I would take out the Eternal Flames. I mean, those Yetis are useless. You got to get rid of those.
Garbage, yeah.
And then I would probably take out maybe one of the Brothers of Fire.
Really, over the Blood Moons?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what do you?
I think that Blood Moon literally hurt him that game. I think that it was actually a drawback. Not just the fact that it cost him a card and 3 mana, but it actually, I think, made his board state worse, right? He killed his own Mishra's Factory with a Blood Moon. You don't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
The factory gives you like a way to interact. You can make a 2/2 to combine block to take down something like an Urnham. I think he actually needs the factories.
Philippe has 4, 4, 8, 9, 10. He's got 10 flyers, and he's got 7, 8, 9. He's got 9 ground teachers and 10 flyers. So I guess he's about evenly split between ground and air. I mean, it's a bad matchup for Arnaud any way you look at it.
Absolutely, 100%. His deck, this is just a total nightmare matchup. He's clearly metagamed against slow controlling, kind of workshop-y style decks, maybe land tax, Land's Edge decks, where he can just blow them up because they're just taking forever to develop, and he's just pinging him and hitting him, and eventually Eternal Flame you twice, you're dead.
Yeah.
And that's certainly his game plan. It's probably served him well. I mean, I think the active volcanoes clearly super, super powerful in the matchup and should help him a lot, particularly if Philippe invests in a creature with unstable mutation as he did in that first game.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got to, and the one big difference obviously between Pyro or Blue Elemental Blast, Red Elemental Blast is that you can use your Red Blast to protect your Red Blasts from their Blue Blasts. You can push through things, and Active Volcano and Flash Flood don't do that. They don't interact on the stack at all. So there's no way to.
Those Red and Blue Blasts are unbelievably powerful spells.
Oh yeah, they're totally format warping. They're incredibly strong. Just being able to, in that kind of interaction, either counter spell or remove a permanent for 1 mana at instant speed, is just as good as it gets, really. In Magic, and nothing short of like Mental Misstep or something, right? Like 0 mana. But yeah, it's going to be a real uphill battle. I mean, all of the tools that he really leans on to punish the slow, controlling, grindy decks that have probably served him, that he encountered in the pods, don't work against this blue-green thing. The blue-green thing is really positioned extremely well, I think, in the format and certainly in this matchup to give him fits. But I do agree with you about the sideboard. I think that Eternal Flame, Mountain Yeti, there's just no way that those are going to be consistent enough to be worth using.
Mm-hmm.
And as bad as Blood Moon is, it's probably better than Mountain Yeti and probably better than Eternal Flame. And he just doesn't have that many cards to bring in. Obviously, the City in a Bottle comes in. He didn't see any reason to use Golgothian Silex. And I think you're right. I think 4 Fissures probably just better than Eternal Flame. Sure, it costs 1 more mana, but you can Eternal Flame and Arnaud. So
Right.
you kind of got to just make do with what you have. Let's go over to Philippe's deck. And looking at Philippe's deck, and you just absolutely steamrolled the guy. What are you looking at for the sideboard, if anything?
Well, I mean, if he did do what a lot of the players did and look at the deck pictures ahead of time, I believe Philippe mentioned, because I'm actually recording this match and was chatting with the guys, I believe he did mention he did study all the decks, so he could easily pull out the crumbles. He's not going to need those. He could swap in the Concordant Crossroads, and perhaps obviously he needs to put in the 4
Flash Flood, yeah.
Or Flash Flood. So I'd pull out the 3 crumbles, and he's probably, I don't know, the Remove Souls. I don't know if he's going to need those, but they would come in handy to counter the Rook Egg as a defense. So I'd probably pull out the 3 crumbles and maybe pull out the 1 white Wailuli Wolf, and I would put in the 4 Flash Floods, and then I would maybe pull out the other Wailuli Wolf and drop in the Concordant Crossroads. That's probably what I would do.
I'm mostly in agreement. I think that you're undervaluing Crumble, mainly because I think Factory is really, really powerful. And I think that having instant speed interaction with Factory is vitally important, particularly when you don't have them. And keep in mind, the Factory has no converted mana cost either, which means that you can crumble it and they don't even get any life. It's just like 1 green mana, instant Plowshares. And better than Plowshares, actually. It just destroys it outright for 1 green.
Yeah.
And I think that factor alone probably pushes the card into a keep in the deck position, just because Factories are so powerful and so decisive. And I actually think that in anticipation of your opponent bringing in an active Volcano, which you're certainly going to expect, I think Unstable Mutation gets a lot worse because it's a lot harder to invest in unstably mutating a blue creature, which is a majority of the creatures in the deck. And certainly Wailuli Wolf is probably, those 2 green guys outside of Arnaud. And Arnaud's big enough already. There isn't really a lot of reason to mutate it. You're really saving mutation for the 2 cheap flyers, for the Flying Man and for the Serendib. And if you're investing Unstable Mutation in your turn 1 Flying Man and the guy just blows it up with active Volcano, you're getting 2 for 1 right at the start of the game. And recognizing that, Philippe may actually cut a couple of those. I definitely think that the 4 Flash Floods come in. And outside of that, I don't really know if he has anything else that really makes a lot of sense. Winter Blast, potentially, just to tap out his opponent's creatures. It does kill those Fire Drakes and can also add extra damage to Rooks also to take them down if necessary. The Enchantment Alteration, if he chooses to keep the Unstable Mutations in, might actually make a little bit of sense. But I don't really think that Philippe has any cards that just stand out to me as being really, really bad for the matchup, the way that, say, Blood Moon and Eternal Flame seem in the other deck.
Right.
With the possible exception of Sylvan Library. I actually think that Sylvan Library is another card you could definitely consider removing, because it's going to be really, really hard to even justify taking 4 points of damage from that. And that's really what the card is in the deck for. That's the card absolutely murders those like slow controlling strategies, because you can take 12 damage from it without real consequence.
Yeah, no consequence, right? The only reason I was thinking that the crumbles would come out was because I would anticipate, knowing, we've got Pendlehaven, we've got City of Brass and the Strip Mines. Arnaud's probably going to leave his Blood Moons in. That's why I was thinking, okay, if he's going to leave his Blood Moons in, we know his Factories will probably get turned into mountains anyways. So that's why I was thinking the crumbles would come out.
You're also missing one very important thing, though, with that recommendation. The ultimate enemy of Philippe's deck is City in a Bottle. And if he takes his crumbles out, it's just game over if that card comes down.
Oh, shit.
What are you going to do? Win?
You have to count or lose.
Yeah, two Cities of Brass, 2 Serendib Efreets, 2 Wailuli Wolves.
Oh, yeah.
4 Serendib Efreets.
I totally missed that.
18 of his cards are destroyed by City in a Bottle. He cannot beat that card.
Yeah, but he does have the mana drains as a.
He does, but it's 2 mana. Like, it just pops out. At some point in time, you don't always have mana drain. The guy just goes City in a Bottle. You're like, oh, well, I just lose.
You're right.
Now.
Okay, so right. He should obviously leave the crumbles in. Maybe pull the 2 Sylvan Libraries out.
Yeah, it's 22 cards. Mutation is also an Arabian Nights card. So the card just absolutely hoses him so bad. So he needs to get crumble in for that.
He
at
can
a minimum.
pull out the 4 Unstables, swap in the 4 Flash Floods, pull out the 2 Sylvans, and put in maybe actually the extra crumble and maybe the Concordant Crossroad.
Yeah, I don't imagine he'd run Concordant Crossroads. I think you don't play that against a red deck. It's just you're spending a card to give their guys haste. That's too, to me, that strikes me as too dangerous. I could actually see him putting in the enchantment.
The only big creature that's really a worry for Philippe is Ball Lightning, which already has haste.
Now there's the other guys too. Like he just plays like Brothers of Fire and hits you for 2, or a Fire Drake. Just giving him, you're giving him. I mean, you're right in the sense that and it also gives his factories haste too. It's not the main issue is like what purpose does the card serve? It's a symmetric effect that is just as likely to benefit your opponent as you.
Well,
and very likely could benefit them more if they have more creatures. And the card's obviously in the deck to deal with enchant worlds like the Abyss.
Well, it has the other added benefit that on average, his creatures are cheap and big. Serendipitans, Urnums, and Serendipifreets, those 10 cards all can attack the turn they come into play if you have Concordant. Whereas, and I was using this strategy with things like Urnum Djinns, Juzum Djinns, Suchis, the big fat ones and the elves to try and get Concordant out early. And you just flood them with big fat attackers that just, wins. So that's another advantage to Concordant is that kind of, and it can be a surprise because you can play Concordant on the turn that you've played a couple of creatures and then attack with everyone.
I think your point is valid. I think that, but the justification that you're making would apply to nearly all situations. If he valued Concordant Crossroads for what you're describing, basically a way to leverage the fact that his guys are on average considerably beefier than the opponent, which they are, because Urnam and Serendip are among the biggest creatures in the format, then he should be main decking Concordant Crossroads and not sideboarding it. That's where it doesn't make a lot of sense. I really think the card is specifically targeting Abyss, and he's not facing that. So it's unlikely to see play. The fact that you have to invest the card in it in a format that is starved for card draw means that every decision you make you have to consider what is the maximum utility and value of any one of these cards in the matchup. Right. And is it really worth drawing that card and displacing some other card that might be more impactful for that purpose?
Got it.
All right, so we're shuffling up for game 2. I imagine Arnaud is going first here, given how aggressive Philippe's deck is, and he needs mana to fight him. So we'll see what they've sideboarded and see if any of these predictions come to pass. Looks like a keep. Can't really see anything other than, I think, City of Brass in Philippe's hand. Down comes, I think that's Library?
Yeah, it's hard to see, but yeah, I think you're right. I think
it's so outrageous. Let's see if Strip Mine gets it. Okay, good.
Oh, there it is.
I think in Arnaud's case, actually, I really, really don't think I play Library turn 1.
I've made a habit of not doing that in these matches because you're so likely to be up against Strip Mine.
Absolutely. I think you lead, assuming that he didn't have that in hand, I think you lead with Strip Mine. If you lead with Strip Mine, the chances your opponent Strip Mines your Strip Mine are extremely high.
Yeah.
Because that gives you some sort of agency in the interaction, and then you play Library of Alexander afterward and you win.
Yes. I've been doing that in a lot of my matches. If I have Library in my opening hand, I don't play it until like turn 2 or 3 because of the Strip Mines.
Yeah, and of course the other option, and this is a more viable option in formats that have fast artifact mana, is you just simply pass the first turn. You just like, okay, go. I've got 6 cards in hand. Go ahead. They go first. You go land, library, draw immediately, and now you're in parity, even though you went second.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sorry, even though you went first and you skipped your first land drop. So down comes Flying Man.
There's the flying. Yep.
See what happens here. That's definitely a mountain. So leaning back here. All right, so we'll see if the unstable mutations are in the deck still, and if even has one. I don't think you probably don't just walk unstable mutation into untapped island here. You got to at least wait for the guy to be tapped out. No, he's okay. That's another Flyman. Good. I like to see that play. Yeah, you would probably almost never ever just slam an unstable mutation there because you just get blown out if the guy has his active volcano. Better to at least wait for him to be tapped out so you can get in for 4 first. Right. But tons of pressure already mounting here. And it looks like Arnaud is in dire need of Brothers of Fire. Chain Lightning to the camera. Looks like hard to know what to kill. It looks like he's killing the Accelerator to stave off potentially the turn 3 Urnam.
Right.
Do you Strip Mine here? He's certainly thinking about it. So do you kill Forest or do you kill Island? Okay, he's going after Island.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that.
The fact he kills Island there is a bit of a signal to me that he doesn't actually have active Volcano. because I think that he would, certainly if I'm in his position, if I have active Volcano, I want to give my opponent blue mana, hoping that he invests substantial mana in either an Unstable Mutation or in a bigger blue creature that I can just remove for one red.
Right.
All right, so he hits for 2. Life totals are still pretty comfy. He's at 17. This could be either Drake or Brothers.
Or Blood Moon.
Brothers of Fire. And the question is, does he have Flash Flood for that threat? Brothers of Fire is going to mop up this game real quick here if Philippe does not have Unstable Mutation, a way to remove it, or at least a bigger threat.
Yeah, now we're seeing the Brothers. Although if he had a Blood Moon and played Blood Moon here, the blue mana would have been locked out because the city
would have been locked out. Yeah, that's true. Could matter, but Philippe is running a ton of islands. He has 12 islands in the deck, so it's unlikely that he would keep him off blue for very long.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd have to invest his entire turn and take 2 more damage. But we'll see here. It might be that the decision to chain lightning away the non-flyer could be very decisive. There's another island red on schedule, and does he have a Serendib to go with it? He's definitely not going to be happy to just let his opponent untap into Brothers of Fire and start pinging off the flyers. 3 mana, down comes Serendib free. All right, tons of pressure. So Arnaud's just in this situation where even if he basically just needs to have active Volcano, or he's just going to fall over dead here in a second.
Yeah.
There's no answer at all.
He can pull that city on a bottle. That would just devastate.
That would be absolutely devastating. Yeah. The other option is, he just passes back.
Now he can.
Yeah, the other option would be chain lightning and ping with the Brothers of Fire, but that would require another mountain as well.
Right.
So 1 damage.
So the Brothers of Fire ability is an instant ability. So if he tries to put Unstable, he can ping that flyer, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And if he tries to throw Unstable Mutation on the Serendib, then he can kill it. But of course, Philippe's, so he does have the active Volcano. He's not utterly screwed.
Uh-oh. There's the drain.
Boomer. Oh, he's mana draining it. Oh. Yeah, that's something that's so painful to see. It's like one of those, if you're in, I know that it feels good to be, can you pause for a second?
Sure.
Since they're moving quickly. It feels good to be like, to catch the guy in 2-for-1 him. Can you pause? All right, thank you. It feels good to capture, to catch the guy with his pants down essentially in 2-for-1 him with the active Volcano. But his deck list, he's got 4 copies of Mana Drain. He's tapped out. You know that you're casting active Volcano. Do not let the guy untap. Like the whole game hinges on that, right?
Right.
Because not only are you going to take the 5 damage from the flyers, but you're now a turn behind because you weren't able to Brothers of Fire away one of the 1/1 flyers either.
Right.
You got to just go for it there. There's no reason to let the guy untap because he's probably just going to send in your face. And now you give him the opportunity to mana drain the spell that is basically the entire game is hinging on, assuming that you don't have another active Volcano. I mean, how does he win the game at this point? 5 points of flying damage, and Brothers of Fire damages you when you use it.
Right.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's rough. Arnaud's, like we said earlier, it's a very rough matchup for Arnaud, but there's also inherent challenges with his deck. I liked his Tournament 1 build a lot better.
Yeah, well, I think it was certainly quite a bit more overpowered, but I'm sure that he was just a little bit, you can see he's...
Yeah, he wanted to try something
flustered and frustrated, fails to draw a land again. He's down to 10. All he can really, unless he's drawn another active Volcano, and maybe this is just theatrics. Maybe he just top decked another active Volcano. We'll see. I guess because the mana drain happened during the attack step, Philippe had an extra mana during his second main, and I guess he did not mana burn from it, so he should actually be at 18.
Yes. That is something that a lot of folks forget. I've forgotten to do it at times.
Yeah, very, very easy to do, given the fact that when Mana Drain was first around, that isn't how it worked. There was no such thing as the second main. You just got the mana in your next turn, no matter what it was. It wasn't
right.
Instead. But yeah, he should be down to he's a little bit lower. Not that it's necessarily
so maybe that's a rule we need to correct, Brian, because we've been playing Mana Drain with the second main phase, but you're right. The second main phase didn't exist in the old school, so maybe that's a rule that we need to correct and have it always come to you in the next turn.
Yeah, there's some other sort of little subtle things also. Obviously, the mulligan rule is another thing to consider.
The mulligan rule, I've discussed it with Michael, and Michael's planning to do a rules like end to end. Yeah, Arnold scooping here.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's just a swift, utter beatdown. It's funny you had a 46-minute video, but they're not playing best of five,
yeah.
right?
I think what happens here is I think I actually play Philippe for fun after this.
Oh, okay. We can pause the game. We can pause the game at this point. But I mean, I think it was a foregone conclusion. This is just obviously an example of a terrible matchup. Maybe they're just playing another game for fun, but a terrible matchup for Arnaud. He just had oh no, it looks like you are stepping in. Just no way to get into this game. There's just no way for him to reliably beat the 4 and 5 toughness creatures. And of course, I think he did make that minor misplay of getting a little bit greedy with the flash with the active volcano and not casting it when the opponent was tapped out. And I think that actually could have been the game if he flash floods there. I mean, if he active volcanoes and kills that thing, unless Arnaud has another creature right away, the Brothers of Fire are going to clean up the 1/1s, and he might get right back into the game.
Yeah, you're right.
He was pretty tilted, pretty dejected over the fact that he just didn't have very many lands to work with.
Yeah,
but that's a real vulnerability of his deck too. This deck just doesn't really function without 3 or 4 mana in play, and with only 3 mana in play, you can't cast most of your spells, and the ones you cast, you're only casting 1 spell a turn. Yeah. Meanwhile, Philippe's deck has a lot of cheaper things to play. It has 1-drops, lots of 2-drops, lots of interaction. I mean, it can do a lot of things with just 2 or 3 land, multiple threats, and that's more than overwhelming when there's just no comeback mechanisms at all.
Yeah.
And the only comeback mechanism that Arnaud has is pyrotechnics. That's it. Once the board gets out of control, he's just dead.
I really like Philippe's build. It's a really strong deck.
Yeah. Well, very, very cool to narrate that game. Really cool to see a blue-green deck kind of come out of nowhere. So it seems to be perfectly positioned in the metagame and succeed so handily. And I'm looking forward to doing more coverage of some more games down the road.
Great, Brian. So we've covered the first match we have here, Arnaud versus Philippe. Arnaud was defeated 0-2. We've got Brad versus Parker and Gregor versus John. So we'll cover those next time.
Been a lot of fun. Thank you for the opportunity to commentate, and looking forward to more games down the road.
All right, Brian. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you so much, and we're signing off, everyone. We'll see you next time.
All right, take care, guys.
We thank you for joining us today, old school Magic players. Please visit us at 4horsemenmagic.com, the official 4 Horsemen website. Here you can find information on how to play in our groups, information on our tournaments, our prizes, our rules, our calendar of events, special projects, interviews, blogs, and much, much more. Also, we have announced our special Winter Spice Tournament number 5. We will be featuring a special and interesting update to the 4 Horsemen banned and restricted list for this Winter Spice Tournament number 5. Registration begins December 10th and goes through January 21st. Sign up at teleria.app today. Also, the 4 Horsemen are orchestrating Thursday night meetups where you can play casual games through the 21st. And the tournament will start January 21st and run through February 18th.